How's it going, guys? I know it's been a while. I've been on a bit of a hiatus, but now I'm finally settled back in. I just moved, so now I'm ready to bring you guys some videos. And what better way to bring back this channel than to talk about what, if I'm being honest, has to be my favorite movie. The Mask of Zorro. Now, The Mask of Zorro, I kind of already reviewed on this channel a while back, but my thoughts have kind of evolved a little bit on it to the point where, yeah, this has to be my favorite movie ever. I know I've always said that The Wizard of Oz was my #1, Gone with the Wind is somewhere up there too, but The Mask of Zorro is just so much fun and so enjoyable to watch. It takes a genre that I love, which is the swashbuckling adventure. If you've seen any of the Michael Curtiz videos on this channel, like Robin Hood or Captain Blood, I love a good sword fight, especially when it's wrapped up into that old school adventurous spirit of a man that's kind of a vigilante, kind of a folk hero. And Zorro just perfectly encapsulates what I love about that genre. It's got sword fights. It's got kind of a vigilante angle where you have the voice of the people trying to overthrow a corrupt government. And it even has some what would later become superhero aspects. Now, I'll try not to repeat myself too much in this video with what I said in that old Zorro video, because I do stand by a lot of what I said in that video. Although that was more of a comparison video, this is just going to be about the 1998 Michael Campbell directed Mask of Zorro. And I love this one so much in particular because it takes some of those old school influences, there's a lot of different influences in this movie, and combines them with a more modern sensibility of filmmaking and pacing to create just a one-of-a-kind experience. It's so much fun. I have not met someone that doesn't like or at least appreciate this movie for what it is. It seems to be a pretty consistent crowd pleaser. It's got a little bit for everybody. It's got some romance, it's got some drama, it's got revenge, it's got an action adventure feel to it, and it just breezes by. With a runtime that's just perfect. It's not too long, not too short. The scenes start and end right when you'd want them to. So let's dive into this thing. Now, The Mask of Zorro is a legacy sequel before legacy sequels were a thing. You could see this as being a sequel of sorts to the 1940s Zorro or even the 1950s Guy Williams show. Actually, having watched a lot of that Guy Williams show in the last year, it is a pretty fun, if not a little bit more sanitized take on Zorro. I actually think continuity-wise, this one feels more like a successor or sequel to that show than the 1940s movie, although you could definitely see comparisons to both. And where this movie starts is Zorro's last ride. You see Anthony Hopkins as Diego de la Vega, the original legendary Zorro, and he's a bit older now. This is clearly the end of his career as Zorro. He's got a wife, he's got a daughter at home, and so he's going on this one last hurrah to make sure that the Spaniards leave California peaceably. And of course, as being a Zorro movie, there's a lot of sword fighting and action and adventure in this opening sequence, and it's amazing. The stunt work is great, even if Anthony Hopkins isn't doing most of the stunts himself, because the actor is like in his 60s and he just had back surgery, so I don't think he was doing most of those stunts. It's probably his stunt double, but his stunt double is doing a fantastic job. There are some very memorable scenes here, and it all culminates in the pose. And this scene really does harken back to the Guy Williams show. You see him do stunts and tricks and little moves that you could see the Guy Williams Zorro doing, although there is one thing that the show would never allow, and that's when Zorro carves the Z into Raphael. And when I was a kid, I never really thought much of that, but here, like, that's a straight up brand that Raphael has to carry the rest of his life. It's a little bit more hardcore and PG-13 than the family-friendly kid show from the 50s would probably allow. That's just one example of this Zorro movie going just a little bit further, a little bit darker than you might expect a Zorro movie to go. And while I definitely think Martin Campbell was on board with all these creative decisions, I have a feeling some of these darker elements came from not Martin Campbell, but Robert Rodriguez, because going back into the production of this movie a little bit, Steven Spielberg wanted to make a Zorro movie, but he didn't really want to direct it. He just wanted to produce it because he was doing other things at the time. He was doing historical dramas, but he thought a Zorro movie could get made and it could work in the 90s with modern special effects, modern storytelling, because it really hadn't been done since Zorro the Gay Blade, and that was more of a parody of Zorro than a straight up Zorro movie. So he brought on Robert Rodriguez, who just made Desperado with Antonio Banderas, and it seemed like a perfect match. But Rodriguez, from what I can tell, wanted to go even darker. He wanted this to be a rated R Zorro, more in the style of his other rated R action movies that he was known for at the time. I guess there were some disagreements, so he ended up leaving, and then they brought in Martin Campbell to really shoot the thing. And because Martin Campbell came in relatively late in the development, he kept a lot of different story elements and actors and locations that Robert Rodriguez and Spielberg had been developing. And I feel like a lot of these darker moments were Robert Rodriguez's influence, and I think it's what makes this movie really stand out. It gives a little bit more weight and gravitas, where it's not just a live action cartoon or a modern recreation of something like the 50s show. This movie has a bit more grit, and that's really evident when it goes full Count of Monte Cristo, where Zorro gets arrested, his wife gets shot, his daughter gets taken away by his mortal enemy, and then he's left to rot in jail for 20 years in this just gross prison. It's so unsanitary. You look at the people that are incarcerated there, they look like lepers. They just look so dirty and gross and decrepit. It's just so unsettling to watch. I remember watching this as a little kid, and whenever we get to these prison scenes and you'd see the other prisoners, it just kind of grossed me out. I didn't like looking at it. But also in true Count of Monte Cristo fashion, after rotting there for 20 years, Anthony Hopkins' hair has gotten a lot longer. He's got a beard, and he's just unrecognizable as Zorro when Raphael comes back to California to check up on him, and he's got plans in California that I'll get to later. But then Zorro realizes that this is the time for his escape, and he does exactly that. He kind of fakes his own death. They bring him out, assuming he's a dead body. They bury him, and then he cuts his way out of the grave, which again borrows from the Count of Monte Cristo. But I can't help but also think that this might be a Silence of the Lambs reference, another Anthony Hopkins role, a role that he won the Oscar for, because he also pulled a very similar trick in that movie where he disguises himself as a dead guy, they wheel him out, and then he escapes. And this is where you start to realize, oh, this is a legacy sequel, because Diego de la Vega is way past his prime. He's much older now. Even though he can still wield a sword like the best of them, he's by no means capable of being Zorro again like he used to be. And now we have this other character, Alejandro Murrieta, played by Antonio Banderas. And they do something interesting here with Alejandro, because Alejandro will become the new Zorro. But what they do with his character is interesting, because he has a brother, and his brother is Joaquin Murrieta. And Joaquin Murrieta is a pseudo-historical figure, kind of a legend in the Spanish West. He's actually one of the figures that the Zorro story was based off of. Kind of a Robin Hood figure. He was a bandit that would steal from the rich and give to the poor. And if I remember correctly, he had some connection with the legend of El Dorado, the city of gold, which also plays an interesting role in this movie as well. But in this interpretation, Joaquin dies in like the first scene that we see him in. We see him and his brother and Three-Finger Jack. Can't forget about him. He's one of the most hilarious characters in this whole movie. They're doing their bandit thing, bringing money to the poor, playing tricks on soldiers. And with these characters, you start to see some of the seeds that will be watered and grow into the Zorro legend later in this movie. But unfortunately, they get stopped by some soldiers led by our secondary antagonist, Captain Love, who shoots Three-Finger Jack while he's flying through the air, and then captures Joaquin, who then kills himself rather than being fully captured. So what do? Well, they decapitate him, because this is the tone that the movie is going for. It's not entirely kid-friendly. There are some darker elements. And Alejandro just has to stand back and watch. So now he's on a path for revenge against Captain Love. Meanwhile, Anthony Hopkins is going after Don Raphael, and it just so happens that Captain Love is under the employ of Raphael. So now their paths are starting to intersect, and Anthony Hopkins sees Alejandro drunk at a bar about to attack Captain Love, and he saves his life by beating the snot out of him so he can't actually fight, because he's in no condition to fight. But what if he can rise above his own personal vendetta and be the hero that California needs? And that basically kicks off the training portion of this movie, which is a lot of fun to watch. It's really interesting to see Antonio Banderas and Anthony Hopkins interact during these scenes, because they just have such great chemistry. You really buy that Anthony Hopkins cares about Alejandro almost like the son he never had. And you do see in a believable way the training progress. It's not just like, oh, all of a sudden he's a master with the sword. You do see the stages of competency from Antonio Banderas. And at about the midpoint of the movie, maybe a little earlier, you actually see him mask up and become what I call Proto-Zorro, which is him going out as Zorro while he's clearly still not ready to be Zorro. It's kind of a test run. He wants to steal this black horse so he can have his own tornado, because, you know, Zorro needs a horse, and this beautiful black stallion. So he masks up, puts on a little makeshift cape, and then goes goes off to get this horse. And this whole sequence in the barracks or stable or whatever it is a lot of fun. This whole section of the movie reminds me actually of the Douglas Fairbanks Mask of Zorro, where they have a very similar scene here. It's in like a stable. He's swinging on chandeliers, he's climbing up ropes, he's doing all kinds of stunts and flips, and he's using the environment to his advantage, which again is something Douglas Fairbanks' interpretation really leaned into. And it just shows that the people that were involved in this movie really understood the character and legacy of Zorro. They didn't just borrow from one interpretation. This scene clearly throws back to Douglas Fairbanks. The opening with Anthony Hopkins in his prime, or I guess his last ride, goes back to the Guy Williams. And the next big section of this movie, after he gets his horse, he gets kind of chewed out for it by Anthony Hopkins. He's like, you're not ready yet. You're not ready to announce to the world that you're Zorro, because you have one more lesson to learn, and that is to be charming. Now that the Zorro persona has developed to an acceptable level, you need to develop your real mask, which is the Alejandro personality. You have to make these people believe that you are a wealthy aristocrat, a don, that just has no care for violence or adventures, such a fop, kind of like the Scarlet Pimpernel. And he goes to this dinner at Raphael's hacienda and he plays the role of Don Alejandro. Zorro never masks up in this sequence. This is all Antonio Banderas trying to convince the other Dons and everyone else at the table that he's one of them, that he could never be Zorro. And this is the part of the movie that really throws back to the Tyrone Power 40s Mask of Zorro, where Tyrone Power was just so foppish and just had no stomach for violence. He just cared about the fine things of Madrid and just wanted to sit and read poetry. He just acts like a spoiled child that never had to lift a finger for anything. And Antonio Banderas does play this part well, and I think he pulls off this scene a little bit better than Tyrone Power did, because Tyrone Power had to do a very similar scene where it's a dinner party and he has to dance with his romantic interest, where while he's talking he's one person, but when he's dancing his true self is on display for a little bit, and then as soon as the music's over he has to go back to his mask. And both movies do this really well, but this movie, there's just such a contrast. You can see it in his eyes, you can see it on his face when he puts up that mask. And now it's time to talk about Catherine Zeta-Jones as Elena, and she is also fantastic in this movie. I don't really have much to add to what I said in my last Zorro video that I did, when I really did break down the actors a lot more. But Catherine Zeta-Jones is fantastic. She looks great, she has great personality. Even though she is Welsh, she's not Hispanic, she has put on this fake accent, but you know, could have fooled me, because she just totally embodies this character. Aside from her look, she has just a fire, a passion for life that Antonio Banderas finds really attractive, and they dance, and this is definitely a more steamy dance number than was in the 1940s version. This is definitely where the 90s influence starts to show a little bit more. And it's fantastic, it's choreographed great, and because it's a much more intense, romantic, passionate dance than the other version, you see more of Alejandro's true self on display, where it doesn't feel like an act. It feels like he's really letting himself get carried away in the moment. And then when he has to snap back, it's just even more obvious that, yeah, these are two completely different personas. And because Alejandro does such a great job of convincing them that he is a Don, that he's a man of stature and vision, they invite him to join them behind closed doors to talk about Don Rafael's real plans for California, and that is to buy California from Santa Anna with gold dug from his own lands, which is very illegal, and Santa Anna would never buy it unless they were marked with the seal of Spain on the gold bars, which of course they faked pretty convincingly. And then we see this movie's interpretation of El Dorado, and it's just this big mine with all the people throughout the movie that you've seen be captured or disappeared by Captain Love and Raphael. Anyone that's been a troublemaker, like the Padre that's always been an ally of Zorro, he's there. Three-Finger Jack is there. He's looking a little worse for wear, but it's definitely still him, and he has some great zingers in this scene. And this whole thing just repulses Alejandro, but he can't let it show because he's trying to fit in with the Dons and get more information out of them. And from here to like the end of the movie is just one action set piece after another. This is when the movie really kicks into high gear, and it's had some pretty awesome sequences building up to this. But from here to the end, it's just boom, boom, boom. One thing after another. You have Alejandro breaking into the hacienda as Zorro in the full Zorro getup. He's fully gotten Anthony Hopkins' blessing to be Zorro now. So he's going in, he's trying to steal the map, steal the plans, which of course leads into the iconic sword fight, which may be the most memorable scene from this movie between Alejandro and Elena, because aside from having great swordplay and choreography, it's a great character moment for the both of them. Because even though it seems like a little bit of a detour, if you were to cut it out, you would lose a lot of the character moments, character building tension between these two. Because over the course of the movie, they don't really get a lot of scenes together where they can just be themselves. And here they are being themselves in a very violent yet romantic kind of way. But right after that scene ends, we go right into a horse chase sequence through the countryside with Zorro and all the soldiers on horseback, and he's doing all these tricks on the horses. He's riding 2 horses at a time. He's riding backwards. He's doing all kinds of things. And he's getting rid of these soldiers one by one. It's just a lot of fun to watch. Before you can really catch your breath, we're already going into the 3rd act. Anthony Hopkins is finally confronting Raphael about Elena, the daughter that Raphael stole from him way back in the day. And Elena, throughout the course of this movie, has kind of been figuring out that maybe her father hasn't been completely honest. She keeps picking up all these clues that maybe she has been to California before that she didn't know about. So her whole worldview is starting to be pulled into question. And now when you have her, Raphael, and Anthony Hopkins with a sword to Raphael's neck, she needs to pick a side. And she eventually chooses to side with her real father, Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins and Elena are going to the mine. And this 3rd act at the mine is when everything comes to a head. It's got all the stunts you would want. Super creative environmental stunts using the structure of this mine set that they actually built and is clearly there. This movie has no CGI in it at all. Everything is real pyrotechnics, real sets or model work. The only things in this movie that are digital are some of the backgrounds and some of the compositing going on with sunsets and landscapes and stuff like that to really make it feel like a picturesque Old West kind of movie. But as far as the action scenes go, it's all in-camera stuff, which makes this movie feel so much more timeless than a lot of movies that came out around this time. Because back in the late 90s, CGI was just starting to become a thing and everyone was trying to use it in different ways. All these different tricks were starting to become available. I don't know if it was Spielberg or Rodriguez or Campbell, but somebody was like, no, we're going to strip this movie back. It's going to feel timeless and old-fashioned in the best way possible. And in the end, Zorro gets the upper hand on Captain Love. Anthony Hopkins defeats Raphael, but not before he gets mortally wounded, and he dies there in El Dorado, but not before giving Alejandro and Elena his blessing. And then the movie wraps up in the most satisfying way to bookend the start of the movie. It's sometime later, you see Alejandro putting the baby to sleep, telling him stories of Zorro's adventures, which harkens back to the beginning of the movie where you had Diego telling Elena stories by her crib as the mother watches on. And it's a much needed, relaxing, quiet, low-key scene to end a movie that's otherwise been a complete roller coaster ride of action, adventure, fun, romance, while at the same time balanced out with a bit more of a realistic, gritty interpretation of what those days in California would have looked like, whether that's the prison conditions, the child labor in the mines, or the really dark scene where Captain Love has Joaquin Murrieta's head in a water jar in an attempt to break Alejandro out of his foppish disguise as Don Alejandro, which at first that scene always kind of bothered me as being tonally inconsistent, but now I see it and I actually really appreciate it for what it is. It's a very crucial character testing moment to see if Zorro is truly ready to put his own personal feelings aside for the greater good, the greater purpose for which he is Zorro. And I think that scene is the moment where he stops being this impulsive wannabe Zorro and really takes on the role and responsibility of Zorro. And that pretty much sums up my thoughts on The Mask of Zorro, at least for now. I know I usually don't double dip on movies that I've already done a video on, but I've been on kind of a Zorro kick recently and I watched the movie again and there are just so many more things that I've learned or observed or my opinions changed on where I just love this movie more and more every time I watch it. But now I turn over to you guys. What do you think about The Mask of Zorro? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.